Welcome back. We're now pleased to begin the next portion of today's program. First, we will hear from Dr. Asha Weinstein Agrawal, who will summarize results from the 9th year of an annual survey project exploring national support for raising federal transportation revenues through gas, mileage, and sales tax. After her presentation, we will hear from our esteemed panelists. As a reminder, we will be pleased to collect your written questions during this portion of today's program. Thank you once again to our keynote speaker, Director Lori Berman. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Please note that in the programs, you'll find more complete bios for each of the people who will address you today. Dr. Asha Weinstein Agrawal is Director of the Mineta Transportation Institute, National Transportation Finance Center. She is also a professor in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at San Jose State University. Her research is focused on finance, pedestrian and bicycle issues, and transportation history. Asha, please join me to share the results of Year 9 survey. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And I am delighted to be here today to, for the very first time, share the results of a survey that, as Karen mentioned, is about transportation taxes and fees. And we're just releasing it today, so you're the first to hear. This poll is the 9th in an annual series that we've now been doing where we assess public opinion about different options for raising new federal revenues, thank you. In particular, with a focus on either raising gas tax rates or introducing new mileage fees. And I'd like to acknowledge, is Hillary Nixon here, my co-author? No, okay, I'm going to have her wave at you all. She's my partner in crime. And also, I very much want to thank the Mineta Transportation Institute, which has funded our survey year after year. Now, it's conventional wisdom that Americans hate taxes, and in particular the tax that we have traditionally used to fund a great deal of our street and highway infrastructure, which is the gas tax. But, well, and here in California, I think right now, as was alluded to in our earlier presentation, that's particularly on people's mind because we just raised our gas tax rates through Senate Bill 1, but at the same time, we now have a recall effort happening. So, is it true that Americans hate the gas tax? We hear that all the time, certainly at professional conferences, you'll hear a lot of hand-wringing over that. But I would argue that this conventional wisdom is perhaps limited and that the general public may not actually be as opposed to certain kinds of increases in our transportation revenue sources. So that's what I'm here to talk about. Now, this year's poll, which again is one in a series, was a random digit dial survey of Americans. So that's when the telephone rings irritatingly during dinner, or maybe when we're taking a nap on Sunday afternoon and somebody asks for a few minutes of your time. And we reach out to both cell phones and landlines, and we do our survey in English and Spanish, and so we end up with a pretty good representative sample of American public opinion. And we mostly ask about people's opinions about different options for raising the federal gas tax rate, as well as 2 different options for introducing a brand new mileage fee. And we also have a sales tax question thrown in there just kind of for comparative purposes. We have asked with identical language these questions year after year so that we can really do, have confidence in our trend analysis to see, has public opinion changed over time? Now, one last thing before I get to the actual findings, which is that I want to stress that what's valuable, I think what we in the room can really take away from the study results, is not the exact support level I find for any particular tax that we ask about in the project, because support for a tax is going to depend enormously on the context in which it's asked about and the exact details of how it's structured. But what I think our survey project does really well, and it has sort of lasting and long-term value for anyone considering a tax increase is looking at how the public responds, the relative support for different options for raising transportation revenues. And clearly, you'll see some options are much more popular than others. And it's that difference, that relative support, that I think is really the important lessons we can take from this project. So let me start. We asked, as I mentioned, about a variety of different versions of raising the federal gas tax, all of which would equate to a 10-cent per gallon increase in the rate. And when we asked about sort of the most generic, plain version of this, where we just told people we're going to raise, gas tax rate 10 cents per gallon for transportation, doesn't say anything more than that. Well, not very popular. We had 34% of people saying that they would support that kind of plain increase in the gas tax for transportation. And a similar thing happened when we asked about a new mileage fee. We told people that this would be a penny per mile assessed on all their travel, and that the money would be used kind of generically for transportation. And this was even less popular than the gas tax. Only 27% of people said that they would support that idea. And these numbers are the kind of things you often kind of hear people wringing their hands about. If you believe we need to fund our transportation infrastructure, they get cited in polls. But those low numbers are really not the end of the story. They're just one piece of the story. So in our polling year after year, we've discovered that every variation on those two plain, what I'll call base case tax options, gets considerably higher support. So let me show you what I mean. So that mileage tax, plain one, 27% of people said they would support it. We also asked about what I'm calling a green mileage tax. And here we told people that the average rate everybody pays would be a penny per mile, but that the specific rate would vary according to the vehicle's pollution level. So more polluting vehicles would pay a higher rate, less polluting vehicles would pay a lower rate. When we asked about this green version of the mileage tax, we got 46% of people saying that they would support it. That's a whole lot more people than the 27% who said that they would support the plain version. And again, what I think is meaningful here is these difference in different variations on the tax idea. And a similar pattern holds for the gas tax. When we asked, what about that 10 cent per gallon increase in the federal gas tax, but where we phase in the increase 2 cents per year over 5 years, support went up to 54%. That's a 20 percentage point increase in support for essentially the same tax, but structured a little bit differently. And to give another example here, we also asked people, well, what about that 10 cent per gallon increase in the federal gas tax, but we're going to dedicate the revenues to maintenance and preservation of the transportation system. When we asked that way, we had 72% of respondents saying that they would support that idea. That's almost 3/4 of our respondents, and pretty. Not only is it it's well over a supermajority, which in California is very important because a lot of our local taxes have required 2/3 of voters or a supermajority to support these local gas tax options. And again, that's 72 percentage points. That's 38 percentage points higher than the 34% of people who said that they would support kind of the generic for transportation gas tax increase. Now, in addition to looking at what our overall set of respondents, reflective of the full American population, might think about transportation taxes and fees, we also looked at some subgroups, for example, men versus women, or people who drive a lot versus people who don't drive at all. And we ended up with 300 plus of these groups where we're comparing people. And a key thing we found is that there's usually not that much difference. So, for example, any group you look at, much higher support for the maintenance gas tax than the plain base case one. So this is not something that just holds for certain parts of the population. And at the same time, there were a few groups that did stand out as particularly supportive in general of these taxes, like strikingly more than a comparison group. And these groups were Asian and Asian Americans, as opposed to respondents who identified as white, people who identified with the Democratic Party, not a big surprise, as opposed to Republicans, People who place a high priority on having government improve safety, as opposed to people who don't prioritize that, and people who place a high priority on improving and expanding transit service. So let me now lastly turn to trends over time. So again, we've been doing the survey for 9 years now with identical questions, keeping methodology consistent. And when we compare this year's results to the previous 8 years, there are a couple of simple messages that I take away from it. First, support for the taxes is pretty similar year to year. It'll bump up and down a little bit, but there's not usually a huge change. But if we look at support in 2010 and we compare that to support today, there has been a modest but noticeable increase kind of across the board, with one exception for the taxes. So in general, we have seen support rise 10 or 15 percentage points across the different taxes in that period. The one exception to this is the flat rate mileage fee. People didn't really like it in 2010, and they still don't particularly like it today in 2018. So just to wrap up, I would conclude that our survey results suggest that transportation tax increases can be acceptable to the public, and it depends on the circumstances. And we can really probably dramatically increase support for the idea of raising new revenues if we carefully think about how we structure the tax and explain it to the public. And one of the key things that we're able to see from our survey work is that it really matters what you spend the money on. And you don't have to list projects necessarily, but you need to give people categories of improvements that they care about, that they value. And we have found that 3 specific purposes that seem to be quite popular with the public are using the revenue for a better environment, for better safety, and in particular, for better maintenance of our transportation system. So for those of you who are interested, we do have some little one-page research briefs lying around or at the back. And MTI also has all of its research up on the web for free PDF downloads. And so I invite you to go look at all the detailed tables there if the details interest you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Asha, and I'm sure the report will be a fascinating read. It's now my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Joining me is Roger Dickinson, Executive Director of Transportation California. Thank you, Roger. Roger was with the law firm of Greenberg Troag as a member of the Government Law and Policy Practice Group. Prior to that, he represented the 7th Assembly District, including the cities of Sacramento and West Sacramento. Roger established himself as a very effective lawmaker, having 42 bills that he authored signed into law. We appreciate you being here today. We have Mike Hursh, General Manager of AC Transit. He was appointed General Manager in 2015, and he's a 9-year veteran of the Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority, where he served as Deputy Director of Maintenance and Security and Chief Operations Officer. He's past chair of the California Transit Association Rail Operations and Regulatory Committee. Thank you for joining us. We have Michael Quigley, Executive Director of the California Alliance for Jobs. Michael has spent his career advocating for infrastructure and transportation development. And since joining the Alliance in 2008, he has helped secure billions of investment dollars toward public works and infrastructure projects. Welcome, Michael. We have Phil Washington, CEO of the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority, better known as LA Metro. Originally from the south side of Chicago and a 24-year veteran of the U.S. Army as Command Sergeant Major. Thank you for your service, Phil. He now leads LA Metro's program. He's responsible for an annual operating budget of $1.6 billion and for overseeing $15 billion in capital projects. Finally, our final panelist of the day is Carl Guardino, President of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, a public policy trade association that represents nearly 400 of the Silicon Valley's most respected employers. Appointed to the California Transportation Commission by 2 governors, he recently led a 3-year campaign for Measure B on the November 2016 ballot. It passed with a supermajority and will yield an additional $6.5 billion in local funds for traffic relief solutions. Carl is named one of the 5 most powerful people in Silicon Valley, and it's our pleasure to have him as a panelist today. So I suggest that you look for additional details in our program should you wish to learn more about their backgrounds. But in the event of time, let's get started. Roger, may we hear from you about the implementation of Senate Bill 1 from your position as Executive Director?
Sure.
You may
Sure.
speak from wherever you're most comfortable.
Well, let's start from here. Thank you. Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to join you, and thanks to the Institute for the invitation to be here on just a gorgeous Bay Area morning. And I have to say that if you have a small measure of any doubt about climate change occurring, waking up in San Francisco in a June morning with no fog ought to convince you that climate change is absolutely real. Transportation California is a statewide coalition of organizations, associations, and companies representing both management and labor, which advocates for more state funding for transportation and on other transportation policy issues. Will Kempton, who perhaps most of you even in the room know, was my predecessor, as well as a legend in transportation circles. But as I told Will when I succeeded him, I'm both taller and better looking. Well, taller anyway. Transportation California was intimately engaged in the long-running legislative efforts that resulted in SB 1. And since it was signed into law, we have been focused on both its implementation and its defense. But before we talk about those activities, and I appreciate especially the remarks of Director Berman about what Caltrans is doing with respect to implementation of SB 1, I'd like to set that stage a little bit for you beyond what she shared. For example, as many of you know, California currently has a population of about 40 million people, but that is projected to increase to 44 million by 2020. And now we have risen to the level of the 5th, perhaps even the 4th largest economy in the world. We also in California are proud of the fact that we enjoy an unparalleled quality of life. And yet when it comes to transportation, we have fallen woefully behind. We are 48th in the nation regarding the condition of our highways. We are in a position where 58% of our roadways need repair or rehabilitation. 87% of our counties have an average pavement rating of at-risk or poor. We have 6 of the nation's 10 worst urban area pavement conditions. 26% of our bridges need major maintenance or preventive work or even complete replacement. We collectively lose nearly 94 million hours a year sitting in traffic. And 14 of the nation's most congested corridors are right here in the Golden State. 66% of our major urban highways are congested. 46% of our transit buses, we've got agencies here that are on the streets every day getting people where they need to go. But 46% of our transit buses are beyond the recommended 12-year replacement age. And over $37 billion is needed for transit capital investment alone over the next 10 years to bring it to a state of good repair. Before SB 1, this hole would only have gotten deeper. The last time the gas tax was raised, as was mentioned earlier, was 1994, and due to inflation and increased fuel efficiency, the buying power of the money that comes in today is about 1/2 of what it was in 1994. However, thanks to SB1, we have an ongoing and sustained base of new revenue projected at about $5.2 billion a year. We talk about this in terms of what it'll generate over 10 years, but it doesn't end at 10 years. There's no sunset on SB1. As most of you may know, it goes on. We know that this money is also dedicated, as mentioned before, and is limited to transportation projects and programs by the state constitution, augmented by the passage of Prop 69 earlier this month. But we all know the challenge. An initiative paid for by partisan interests for partisan purposes that poses a severe threat to this vital funding stream. So for Transportation California, our job is twofold. First, we must make sure that as many projects to provide immediate improvement to our streets, highways, bridges, and transit systems are undertaken and completed. Doing so will be the best demonstration to voters that their money is being spent as intended. Transportation California is working with all our partners to facilitate such projects. Second, we must make sure that voters know that if the initiative passes, 5,000 projects, many of which are getting underway this year, to fix streets, repair bridges, and improve transit service all over California go away and won't be done, impairing public safety, hurting our economy, and damaging our environment. I'm sure Michael Quigley is going to have much more to say about that when he speaks as well. Transportation California will continue in concert with the Coalition to Protect Local Transportation Improvements, or CPLTI, just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Our efforts to educate the public regarding what is at risk. As an example, in May, we had this insert included in the Sacramento Bee to inform the public about what was happening in the Sacramento region. We also joined with the California Transit Association and the California Alliance for Jobs to commission a study by the American Road and Transportation Builders Association that shows SB1 over the next 10 years will generate about $183 billion for the California economy and 68,000 jobs on an annual basis, along with clean air and other environmental benefits. This is a copy of the study, but if you're interested in seeing the entire study, it's available on our website at transportationca.com. You can also get a host of other useful information on the website mentioned. I want to repeat it, that Director Berman mentioned it, rebuildingca.ca.gov, which includes an interactive map of the projects all over the state. We'll be engaging in more educational efforts around the state using a variety of media as we head into the fall. But much more than is usually the case with a statewide initiative, this campaign must have a local approach in each community. I urge each of you to make sure your family, friends, neighbors, colleagues, associates, employees, anyone you encounter knows what is at risk. Guaranteed funding for over 5,000 transportation projects that will increase public safety, drive our economy, benefit our environment, create new jobs, and improve our quality of life. This is truly a fight we can't afford to lose. Thanks very much.
Mike Hursh, General Manager for AC Transit.
Big guys like hiding behind podiums, so I don't know how well this is going to work here, but I'm most comfortable. Dr. Philbrick asked for some concrete examples of SB1. Bus agencies don't have a lot of concrete, but I am going to give you some actual what SB1 is doing today. Before I do that, I want to thank Mineta Transportation Institute and the Commonwealth Club, because this is frankly the #1 issue facing public transit today. It's certainly a very critical issue facing AC Transit. Before I do that, I just want to remind everybody, sometimes AC Transit, I think, is in the shadows. We're the 3rd largest transportation or transit agency in the Bay Area, third largest bus only in the United States. We carry over 170,000 people a day. I'm not here to try to recruit you on to public transit, but I am here to explain, even if you're not a public transit user, the benefit. We carry 14,000 people a day into this city or on our Transbay service. Some of that's to Palo Alto and the peninsula. But can you imagine if 14,000 people were in automobiles instead of buses? We're extremely excited to be moving into the Salesforce Transit Center. We expect that Transbay service to increase. But candidly, I need to give you an update on the state of public transit. We could operate more service today if there was more funding. When SB1 passed, everybody said, oh yay, no new money, what are you going to do with it? Well, it wasn't new money for us, it was a lifeline. Public transit in the United States, with the exception of Seattle, we are all facing declines in ridership. Some agencies are facing double-digit declines in ridership. We're fortunate at AC Transit, largely because of voter support, both sales tax and parcel tax, our ridership is basically flat. But without, and understand, SB1 dollars are flowing today. One of the concrete examples is that SB1 has money for operations. We would have had over a $3 million deficit this year if it was not for SB1. We currently have, and understand this, 45% of my over 2,000 employees are retirement eligible. We have a hiring freeze, a travel freeze on non-safety critical training, because if SB1 goes away, when you're a bus-only agency, the only place you can make reductions is in service. 170,000 people a day. Over 80% of our trips are work or school related. Over 70% of our riding public lives at or below the United States poverty level. Remember, this is the Road Repair and Accountability Act. As was said earlier, it's a law. Our buses are on those congested roads. Our buses suffer from those, no offense, from those road conditions. We need to do a better job of explaining to the public the price of auto ownership is not what you pay at the gas pump. I think a lot of auto owners today forget about insurance, maintenance costs, and those roads are causing vehicles to wear at a much faster rate. As was already said, many of the buses in the state of California are past their usable life. We have 650 buses. The average age is over 7 years. We have a significant number of buses that are over 14 years. SB1 dollars will be used to replace buses that are beyond their useful life, but it will be done in a clean way. We're extremely proud to be the operator of the largest zero-emission hydrogen fuel cell fleet in the United States. In the world. Director Peoples reminds me, one of my board members. We are adding over 10 hydrogen fuel cell buses in the next, again, SB1, in the next few months, concrete. We are adding battery electric buses to our zero emission fleet. And we were successful in receiving a combination of two grants, $29 million, a portion of which is from SB1, because we developed a plan to deploy zero emission buses in disadvantaged communities and areas where non-attainment has not met. We will have the cleanest buses running in the communities that most desperately need zero emission, clean public transportation. That happens because of SB1. Again, we're that sometimes overlooked public transit network on the other side of the bridge. We connect to 20, I describe us as the web that connects every other agency together. We connect to 25 BART stations, 6 Amtrak Capital Corridor stations, 3 ferry terminals, and 16 other public and private transportation systems. We love BART, we love Grace Kroniken, but we all know that BART is extremely overcrowded, particularly in the peak. We could add service today if we could purchase buses and had operating dollars for those buses. For us, $12.7 million a year is SB1 directly to our operating budget. If that goes away, that's a $12.7 million service reduction. I appreciate the opportunity to be up here. Again, I really appreciate Mineta for shining the light on this so important topic. Please, we want to evangelize you, go out in your communities. This is about pothole repair. It's about reducing traffic, which gets our public transportation systems more reliable, more on time. Again, even if you're not a public transit rider, you benefit from the improvements in our road networks, and you benefit both economically and in your personal life from a strong public transportation system. Thank you.
Thank you so kindly for picking up on my pun and sharing those concrete examples. As a federally and state-funded university transportation center, it's important to note that we can't lobby and we can't advocate, but we can certainly educate, and that's the purpose of today's program. With that said, may I now invite Michael Quigley, Executive Director for the California Alliance for Jobs. Let's hear about the workforce impact. Thank you.
Thank you. The Alliance for Jobs is a labor management organization that was founded over 20 years ago by both the management and the union leadership of California's heavy construction industry. And today we represent over 2,500 contractors and over 80,000 union construction workers who build and maintain our state's infrastructure. And the Alliance was founded with a mandate to work with both the political structure, but also communicate the benefits of transportation to the voters of this state. And over the last 20 years, we've been very successful at a local level, communicating with the campaigns that were needed to create the local pots of money through our self-help county programs. And now we have over 24 counties representing about 80% of the population of the state, including some of our more conservative counties like Orange County, that have had the opportunity and have successfully passed with a 2/3 measure a local transportation option. And that is something that I think we should all think about as those forces who are moving forward with repeal, is that this state is a pro-transportation state. As with polling we just heard about earlier, that matches with other public polls and some of our internal polling, there is an overwhelming desire from the voters of California to see improved transportation options, an improved transportation system, and they're willing to pay for that if they feel that the money is going to its appropriate designation. And as you move forward with this fall, and we're in this now hyper-partisan frame about what gas tax repeal is, who's behind it, and what this is going to mean for the future of the state, I think it's important that we focus back on what the benefits are, both to the network, but to the individual motorist. And we'll talk a little bit about that here during my presentation. You know, $26 billion of this $52 billion pot over 10 years is going directly to local communities. You know, that's for your own streets and roads, you know, your neighborhoods. And this money will be spent in every community, every county. It will literally be a transformative project. It will transform the way we deliver projects across the state. And you see here with Director Berman and others, we are gearing up and scaling up to really make a major change in how California's transportation system works. However, there are those who oppose this. And so the Alliance has been leading the charge to really structure a campaign and structure a message and really structure a future for California where we can deliver these projects and don't move backwards. $15 billion is going to fix it first highway repairs. And $4 billion over 10 years is going to be just for bridge and culvert repairs. That's going to repair over 500 bridges in this state. $3 billion for trade corridor improvements, $2.5 billion to reduce congestion, $1.4 billion for interregional highway and intercity rail. This is going to touch every aspect of our transportation system. And the economic benefits are clear. You know, Roger mentioned the study that we had worked on together along with the Transit Association. You know, this SB1 is directly going to create over 68,000 jobs annually across the state. And 28,000 of those jobs are in direct highway, bridge, and street construction. Another 21,000 in the transit sector, and over 18,000 in the design, engineering, and right-of-way. So, and that doesn't even include the induced economic activity, which you can look at in our study. We actually went and analyzed what these transportation investments will mean outside of the construction and engineering sector, and looked at 19 different economic sectors, everything from agriculture and mining to tourism. And so this will have a ripple effect across our economy, really unlike anything we've seen, because it is a permanent program. This $183 billion in economic activity and driver benefits is going to mean the repair and repaving of over 84,000 lane miles over the next 10 years. Replacement to 556 state and local bridges in the first 5 years. And importantly to this overall discussion as well, California drivers will save over $800 million in operating costs on their vehicles because of improved roadways. So when the opponents of repeal, well, that's us, when the proponents of repeal are pushing this narrative about the costs, they are ignoring the benefit, both the financial benefit, and the benefit to the motorist quality of life. And so that's ultimately what's going to be up to our campaign, is to communicate, is that this is a transformational project. These projects are transformational to your actual community where you live. You will see the benefit. And what's going to happen, I think, over the course of this year is that voters are going to figure out what's really happening, who's behind this, what they want to accomplish, and what they stand to benefit. And they're going to make a decision about, is it worth 12 cents a gallon? And I think most of them are going to side with us. We had the opportunity to pass Prop 69 in the June ballot with almost 81% of the voters' support. That's just how intense the voters feel about dedicating money towards transportation, getting that money where it's intended to go so they can feel the benefits. And now here we are on the SB1 repeal. The repeal folks have submitted over 900,000 signatures. They need 580,000 valid signatures to qualify, and we expect that to happen. Could actually happen before the end of the day today. If not, very likely on Monday. So this fight is on our hands, and it's going to be up to us to ultimately win and fight this. The folks who are funding the repeal effort, I think it's important that we let people know about that information as well. The California Republican Party contributed $375,000. John Cox himself has contributed $250,000. Paul Ryan, Steve Scalise, Kevin McCarthy, Mimi Walters, and other congressional Republicans have put in about $750,000. And then there's another $400,000 from out-of-state interests that showed up to qualify a repeal of California's gas tax. There's a real estate developer in Michigan who gave $100,000 to this effort. What does he care? And that just shows you what's the real motivation behind this. And this has nothing to do with supporting California's future. It has actually everything to do with protecting a handful of Republican congressional seats. And that's why this question is before us today. We have a very difficult task in front of us with this campaign. But what polling is showing us, as we've heard today, and we've heard in the past, and we'll hear again in the future, is that voters want to see solutions. They need to know that the accountability and the transparency is there for the revenues that they're coming out of pocket to generate, and that money directly translates into transportation benefits and options for them in their communities. We're going to have to do a very broad and coordinated effort, but will ultimately be many sub-region campaigns rather than one singular statewide message. This repeal fight will be fought in every community. It will be fought on a regional basis with regional messengers talking about regional benefits. So some of the folks here in this room, expect to be getting a phone call at some point, before November. We're going to need folks like you who are intelligent, informed transportation professionals to be able to go out in your own communities and communicate to both your neighbors, but also your broader political establishment. Because even within the Bay Area here, there are folks who believe that repeal is the correct course of action. And we think that with the three themes of letting folks know what the benefits are, letting folks know who, both what the benefits are and what transportation accountability and protections have been in place now through Prop 69 and other previous ballot measures. And finally, the third piece of information is that who's behind this and what they hope to accomplish by repealing our gas tax. And when voters learn these facts, they're not going to support the repeal, folks. I think it's up to us to ultimately communicate that, but I feel confident that come November, California will move forward with transformational road improvements, transit projects, and bridge safety upgrades that will make ultimately a better future for all of us. So thank you.
We look forward to hearing more how we can help the effort during the question and answer period. Phil Washington, Command Sergeant Major, please may we hear from you next. Thank you. CEO of LA Metro.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me here. Yes, the fight is on. The fight is on, and it's a real battle to save SB1. And I've got my war clothes on, but we have to make sure that we do not lose this battle. LA Metro, as you may know, we move about 1.3 million people a day on buses and trains, and we are also doing highway improvements. You know that LA Metro is the largest county in America with over 10 million people. And we went to the ballot in 2016 and asked LA County voters there to invest in infrastructure. And they did. They said yes, to the tune of about 71% of the voters there said yes, we will support this measure. And we were bold enough to ask them to support a measure with no sunset, where that particular investment continues unless voters decide to end it. Very, very bold to do that, but I say that and I mention that because at the local level, folks understand the value of infrastructure investment. They understand that value, and in 2016 and also last year, of all the local measures in the country, 70%, over 70% of those measures were successful. Now that tells you something that folks, again, at the local level understand the value of infrastructure investment. That measure was called Measure M down in LA County, allowing us to implement 18 mega projects in the first 15 years, 40 mega projects in the first 40 years, thousands and thousands of jobs that are being created. And within that Measure M, we also adopted what we call 28 by 2028. This is an ambitious effort to complete 28 projects by 2028. That's 10 years. And 2028 happens to be the year of the Olympics as well. And so the idea to complete 28 projects in 10 years, I believe I can say that within Measure M is the most ambitious endeavor in this country, and we're looking to do that. And SB1 will provide the assistance for us to accelerate those projects. It's already doing that. In this first tranche of funds, it is helping us accelerate a rail connection to LAX. It is helping us with a rail line called the West Santa Ana branch that will come up from the southeast part of Los Angeles all the way up to downtown through some of the most impoverished zip codes and neighborhoods in LA County, providing local hire arrangements to allow for people in those disadvantaged communities to help build their own communities in terms of job creation. It will allow us to improve our Orange Line BRT. And so it's a whole list of projects that SB1 is helping us with, to include first and last mile. We are looking at what we call microtransit to allow for smaller vehicles to do curb-to-curb Uber and Lyft-like services. We are on the cutting edge of doing projects like microtransit to get people around and to address this first last mile issue. We're looking at our entire bus system at LA Metro in an effort called Next Gen to wipe the slate clean of routes and look at new employment centers, look at new residential areas to determine whether we should have new routes going to new residential and employment centers. We are really thinking about how we can speed up that bus system. One of the surveys that we did recently, and the results of that survey that we got back said that the number one initiative that we need to do in LA County is speed up the bus system. Because people, right now on our local bus routes, our speed is like 9 miles an hour. On average. On the express routes, it's 11 miles an hour. This is crazy. We need to speed up the bus system. We have initiatives in order to do that. So we're excited about SB1. We're excited about carrying the battle and fighting to make sure that people understand the value and the benefit of these investments. We are communicating through PSAs. We are treating this like the campaign that Measure M actually was as well. So I look forward to your questions. I'm happy to be here, and thank you for having us.
Last but not least, CEO of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, Carl Guardino.
We'll do this dance one final
I
time.
know, this is
Great.
unexpected, by the way.
And you handled it well as you do with everything, Karen. What an honor it is to be back at the Commonwealth Club. My wife Leslie and I recently celebrated our 15th wedding anniversary on May 10, and to underscore the generous and romantic man that I am, I took her away for 15 hours.
Oh. Yay!
Yes, and we're still married. That was because we were in the final sprint of 74 straight days to run a 9-county Bay Area traffic relief campaign known as Regional Measure 3, which our visionary voters in the 9-county Bay Area passed last week, 2 weeks ago on June 5th, by 55.2% of the vote. To a great wedding with a great wedding cake. Think of that wedding cake with several layers. Those represent the layers of funding that almost all complex transportation improvements require in order to move forward. There's often a federal layer, a state layer, regional layer, and local layers of funding, and sometimes, increasingly, private sector layers of funding as well. Let me give a couple of examples of those layers tied to specific improvements here in the Bay Area that underscore the importance of Senate Bill 1. First, the 101 corridor. 2 quick examples. Caltrain. Many of us, public and private sector, have been trying to electrify the Caltrain commuter rail line for more than 2 decades. And we celebrated a milestone last year. Leslie Rogers, if you're still here, thank you for your leadership from the FTA, with $647 million in federal funds as the final layer of that beautiful wedding cake. But the 20 years preceding it built the entire $1.98 billion that were needed to bring that dream to reality. And why is the electrification of Caltrain important? Yes, it's 97% cleaner, which for those of us who are concerned about climate, pollution, and greenhouse gas emissions truly matters. It's 17% faster for those of us who are watching every moment in our go-go days here in the Bay Area. But for many of us, the true beauty is that it adds 80% more capacity. You see, Caltrain today runs with 65,000 weekday passenger trips. It is crammed to capacity in the AM and PM commutes in both directions of those commutes. With electrification, which will be done by 2022, it grows it from 65,000 weekday passenger trips to more than 110,000 weekday passenger trips. That's an 80% improvement. And when 3 out of 5 Caltrain riders are choice riders, they own a car, they're making a choice to get out of their car and onto a Caltrain car, that is transformative for the congested 101, 280, El Camino corridors, and local streets and roads. SB1 funds, announced in April and May with cap and trade funds, added nearly 165 million more to those Caltrain commuter rail improvements, part of the wedding cake. Also at that time, at the California Transportation Commission, we were able to fund another 235 million in SB1 funds for the 101 corridor for managed lane improvements. That was matched in that cake by an unprecedented 50 million directly from private employers. Not what private employers pay through our sales tax increases and our other increases. That was writing checks totaling $50 million. Again, layer cake. The other example that I'd like to cite is something that we've been working on with leaders like Rod Dierdon Sr. and others for several decades, and that's the improvements to extend the incredibly popular but incredibly overcrowded BART system into Silicon Valley. Layers, local layers, 3 different countywide sales tax campaigns in 2000, 2008, and 2016 for both segment 1, 10 miles of an extension into Santa Clara County, and segment 2, the final 6.1 miles of an extension into Santa Clara County to connect with Caltrain, both at the appropriately named Dierdon Station at the SAP Arena, and into Santa Clara, across from Santa Clara University, with Caltrain commuter rail, so that we finally achieve rapid rail around the entire Bay Area. But those layers are key. And in April, with Transportation Secretary Brian Annis and Transportation and Housing Senate Chairman Jim Bell, we were able to announce with SB1 funds and cap and trade funds that state layer of $730 million for segment 2. Segment 1, let's enjoy this together. Segment 1, that first 10-mile stretch of the extension of BART into Silicon Valley, with a station in Milpitas and the North San Jose neighborhood of Berryessa, is still running $150 million under budget. Quite an achievement. One person thinks so. And that's probably my mom, so thank you. 150 million under budget, and we expect that to open between March and September of next year. Segment 2, we believe, will open by 2026. When that happens, we will again have built rapid rail around the entire Bay Area, and it will not happen without the preservation of Senate Bill 1. And this is where I get to switch hats from an advocate to a program and policy maker. through the California Transportation Commission, on which I've been proud to serve these past 11 years as one of 9 gubernatorial appointees and 2 Assembly and Senate appointees. Just at our May meeting alone, we were able to allocate $2.7 billion in SB1 funds through trade corridor improvements, through the congested corridor improvements, and through the state-local partnership improvements. That totals, just in the last year, $9.2 billion allocated through Senate Bill 1 funds. 5,000 different improvements. Every single one of the 58 counties that comprise California. Every city in our state but 2. That is the impact and the opportunity that we have through the passage of Senate Bill 1 and its preservation. That allows the California Transportation Commission, instead of sticking fingers in the dike every year with roughly $6.1 billion in transportation funds, to nearly double that to $12 billion. And matched with federal funds that we're much more likely to get when we have a strong local, regional, state match. With that layer, again, of federal, state, regional, and local, we have an opportunity to have a beautiful marriage of funds at all levels of government to move our state forward. Since I hope I've made you all hungry, I'll end with one more food analogy. We have a choice. We can grow the transportation funding pie, or we can do what we have traditionally done, and that is to fight over the crumbs. It's much more successful when we grow the pie. Thank you.
Thank you to our panelists. Some light and levity with a very complicated and timely topic. Now, on to our questions, of which we have very many. First from Mike Hursh. Question from the audience. AC transit is very accessible, yet real-time departures can be unreliable. How is the agency using technology to address this problem, and are Senate Bill 1 funds being used to that end?
Thank you so much for whoever asked that question. We know it's the #1 complaint. I'm extremely excited to give you a progress report. We are replacing what we call AC Transit. Our vehicle location is updated about every minute and a half, and we don't go much further than 9 miles an hour, but still, even at 9 miles an hour, a minute and a half, your bus can be significantly different than where the computer thinks it is. The new system will give us much greater GPS accuracy and update every 15 seconds. It's on an operating system that's supported. Credit to the board for seeing the need for this years ago. The project should be completed at the end of this year, so this one doesn't actually have SB1 funds in it. But again, those SB1 funds fund the operating of the buses. We're on what's called mini fleet right now, so 39 buses are actually out with the new system. Most excitingly, we just had buses in the Salesforce Transit Center this week and verified that the communications and GPS signal is accurate. We can actually see where the buses are inside of the Salesforce Transit Center, so that was pretty exciting for us.
Thank you. Phil, two-part question. Why does LA not have as vast of a transportation network as San Francisco? Will the city change in time for the Olympics? Because the sprawl is really intense.
Yes, the sprawl is intense. And let me say that, while I mentioned the speeds, keep in mind that we're competing against a whole lot of stuff on those streets, and buses are stuck in the same traffic that cars are. And one of the things that we don't like being #1 in is congestion, which for the 6th straight year, I believe, the LA area was #1 in the world in congestion. That's incredible. You know, I think people must be reminded that we move 1.3 million people a day. And so I'm stunned that when I talk to people, they don't realize LA has a subway. I mean, people just don't realize that. But we have a very, very large system. I predict with all the investment that is going on over the next 15, 20 years, that we will surpass New York in the number of people that we move per day. And New York is around 6, 7 million a day or something like that. I predict we will surpass New York. So this investment and this transportation revolution that is going on in LA County, I believe will make us the transportation infrastructure center of excellence. And I think the mode share, which is right now between 7 and 10%, that's the amount of people that actually take transit. It's between 7 and 10% now. I think we're going to be at about 25% in the next 20 to 30 years.
Excellent. The second part to the question, you spoke briefly about the introduction of micro transit.
Yes.
Can you talk more about the rollout of that program and how it becomes a solution to first and last mile challenges?
Well, I think that this micro-transit idea, we've already brought on 3 firms to help with that. We have assigned them geographic locations within LA County to pilot this initiative. And so where we cannot get a 40-foot bus to navigate various streets, we think these smaller vehicles that we will use our own labor and our own drivers to actually drive these vehicles, we think that that will have a big influence on ridership. We think, and we're talking curb-to-curb type service, we think that will address that first and last mile issue very, very well, even if it's taking people to our rail stations or around town. We think that that is really going to address some of the issues that we have, particularly with seniors as well, which we are going to specifically market to.
Excellent. Thank you. Roger, you spoke in your comments about the incredible benefit of Senate Bill 1 funding. Can you talk now about what will be the major impact without SB 1 funds if the repeal effort is in fact successful?
Absolutely, and that's the key to, I think, what we're going to have is a dialogue during the fall before the election. Through the work of every city and county in the state, the work of the California Transportation Commission of Caltrans, we have about 5,000 projects all across California. You've heard many of them described. They are everything from filling the pothole on your drive to work to major bridge and highway rehabilitation, repair, and replacement. The fact is, and I think this has been mentioned this morning, there is no replacement. If this money goes away, if this $5 billion plus goes away with the repeal of the funding sources that were included in SB 1, we go back to where we were. We go back to the California Transportation Commission deleting projects from the state transportation improvement program. We go back to cities and counties that have a steadily deteriorating and degrading quality to the condition of our streets and roads. And this isn't, in fact, just a reversal of going back to where we were. It actually is worse than that because, as I think most of you probably know, this deterioration occurs at a rapidly escalating rate, something approaching an exponential rate. So you find yourself, if you're a local public works director, over time, not just looking at trying to fill a pothole or do a slurry seal or an overlay, which you would have done if you had money in the normal course of maintenance, you start to stare at a replacement project in the face, which is many times more expensive generally than simply the maintenance that would have kept that condition in a state of good repair. The implications of this go, though, way beyond just the condition of our transportation system, and it gets to some of what Michael was talking about, the jobs that won't be created, the impact on our movement of goods. Director Berman talked about the extent to which we rely on our transportation network, not just in California, but across the nation, to move goods to and from our ports, imports and exports. We start to see a real negative and detrimental impact on our economy. Our environment will be adversely affected. So there's virtually no aspect of our life in California that, and frankly beyond our borders across the country, that won't be affected if we don't succeed in defending proposition SB1 and we see a return to where we were in terms of funding before it passed.
Thank you. Thank you. In terms of the Senate Bill 1 repeal effort, recent polls, and I'm sure many of you have read the results, suggest that up to 51% of California voters would be in favor of repealing Senate Bill 1. Now, we see that in more rural communities. Carl, can you talk to us about the positive impact of Senate Bill 1 investment in our rural communities and how they are benefiting specifically?
While it is an incredible honor to serve on the California Transportation Commission for 11 years, let me tell you how depressing it is when for several years our meetings were mainly to delay, defer, or derail transportation improvements, especially in our rural areas where they rarely have the staff to equip themselves for the procedures of applying for funds, meeting those deadlines, and being successful in achieving those funds. Make no mistake, this impacts every region of our state. I mentioned how proud we were to pass Regional Measure 3 on the June 5 ballot, and we should be, but let's put this in perspective. Regional Measure 3 over the next 25 years will generate roughly $4.5 billion critically needed dollars for 35 specific improvements with that regional layer of the wedding cake. SB1 is $5.2 billion each and every year in perpetuity. Capture how important that is, not to just relatively prosperous Bay Area residents, but those rural residents and more suburban residents throughout our state, that without SB1, our transportation infrastructure will continue to crumble. And as Michael Quigley adroitly noted, SB1 is also key because it helps address roughly 7 of every $10 collected, the aging pains of California's transportation systems. The crumbling conditions of our 50,000 state highway miles, 15,000 state bridges, the 200,000 culverts that Lori Berman mentioned, we have to protect from our aging pains. 3 out of every $10 is for those growing pains. That's enhanced through efforts like Regional Measure 3, because Regional Measure 3 is almost entirely for growing pains. It takes both if we're going to succeed from a quality of life perspective, whether rural, suburban, or urban, as well as from an economic perspective.
Wonderful. Thank you. Michael Quigley, you talked about the increase of up to 68,000 jobs that will result in Senate Bill 1 investment. Given the impending shortage in a qualified workforce in transportation that already exists, how and where will the workers come from to fill these 68,000 jobs?
I think that's a really good question. It is one of the main implementation issues that we're going to have to deal with next year once we get past this, the fight this fall. There is definitely, as we know, a worker shortage, and this is going to require a tremendous increase in the number of apprenticeship programs that the state is offering. The thing about SB1 is that a kid who's graduating high school, say in just this May or June, and looking at his opportunities or her opportunities going forward in a career, maybe college isn't for everyone. They have the opportunity to enroll in an apprenticeship program out of high school that, most people don't know that apprenticeship programs require about 4,500 hours of classroom and on-the-job training. It takes about 4 years to complete. And once you move out of an apprenticeship and into your journeyman status, you are now a fully qualified member of the construction workforce. You can work on multiple different types of projects, from road repairs to transit construction to whatever it is that you're called upon to do. And you could work your entire career off SB1 dollars and work exclusively on those type of projects and retire with a pension and a healthcare program that would essentially give you an entree into middle class life. And that is one of the great unsung benefits of what these sort of transportation jobs create, is that it allows us to bring back some of that social equality in terms of allowing people who aren't going to end up with a master's degree from Stanford to still find a decent job that they can support their family with, that provides them a degree of healthcare and retirement security that is comparable to any other private sector job. And they can do that with the implementation of SB1, like I said, for their entire career. So I think that's one of the things that we'll have to communicate as we go forward in these different communities, is really what the job potential is. And it's going to be a challenge to get those workers in place. However, I do believe that the opportunity is still great and the benefits are there. And people will gravitate towards this, especially given how difficult the affordability problems are becoming in the state. These jobs are very valuable in any community because it does allow you, as I said, to close that gap of social inequality.
And Karen, if I just add on to that, actually SB1 includes $5 million a year specifically directed to workforce development and investment. So the people who, in many cases around the state, are either unemployed or underemployed can have that bridge to what Michael's talking about, a career in the construction field or an allied field through workforce development programs and apprenticeship programs that will be the beneficiary of funding through SB1.
Can I add to that as well?
You may, Phil.
Because I think that is so important, this whole workforce issue. I think it is really a national emergency. With the infrastructure that needs to be built, new infrastructure, and the rebuilding of infrastructure now in this country, this is an issue that is so important. We have built what I call a career pathway in transportation infrastructure. And this career pathway is really a cradle to grave kind of pathway. Just this last Monday, we kicked off a transportation school, grades 6 to 12, in one of the most impoverished areas of Los Angeles. And we kicked off that school, great fanfare and everything. But the idea is, and the focus of that school is foster care kids, at-risk kids, DCFS kids, really changing the lives of these kids in these areas. So this idea of a cradle-to-grave pathway, with the cradle being that school and the grave being the CEO position, this becomes very important.
Last comment on this question.
I'll try to be quick, but it's such an important topic. We need our community college system to respond much more quickly. Time doesn't allow us to get into the disruption and the whole automation thing, but the days of maintaining a combustible motor engine are gone. We need to train a workforce to be able to maintain, whether it's a hydrogen fuel cell bus or a battery electric bus. The buses we're taking delivery on today have 18 computers in them. That's only going to expand. It's no longer a mechanic with a wrench. It's now a technician position, and we have to train our incumbent workforce, but also develop the upcoming workforce to be able to maintain that highly advanced fleet.
Okay, I'm going to take the bait on this too. So why is that community college effort so important? The 19 community colleges in the Bay Area, 272,000 students, 72% are people of color, 53% are female. We say we have a diversity problem in our workforce, especially our technology workforce, and we absolutely say we have a shrinking middle class in this high-cost region, and we absolutely do. So keeping that wedding cake going, the more we can marry those 19 community colleges with each other and the offerings they have to equip these kids of color and gender diversity with our employers to train for those jobs that often only need a 2-year degree or a certified course for jobs starting at $85,000 to $150,000 a year, the more that we're going to be successful as a sustainable region.
Excellent comments, thank you for those. Now to you in the audience, if I don't get to your question, my apologies. You can see this is a very rich dialogue, and I invite you to come up and speak with our panelists one-on-one at the conclusion of today's program. We've reached the point where we have time for one last question. This one has a little bit of a different flair, so I'm going to read it verbatim, and then ask you each to respond with 30 seconds or less. This program is essentially an SB1 pep rally. Can any of the panelists say anything about reforms needed to improve California's transportation governance, administration, and finance? Or, the challenging part, are you all part of the same echo chamber? Who wants to go first?
Happy to. 30
Mark,
seconds, right?
You got it, 30 seconds.
We still need a Butch and Sundance moment. I'll jump if you jump. So often folks of my party, the Democratic Party, say it's all about revenue. So often folks of the Republican Party say it's all about reform. It's both. SB1 has some of both. But we still need areas that impact transportation improvements like CEQA reform to continue to advance projects to be efficiently delivered and cost-effectively delivered, and we need to continue to work on that.
So I'll jump in on that real quick. I talked about how public transit is facing we're in the fight of our life, and I don't want to attack the transportation network companies Uber and Lyft, but I do want to argue about an uneven playing field. We're very proud that we are 100% accessible. We operate paratransit in conjunction with fixed route service. We do not have an even playing field today. Uber and Lyft are clogging our roads. Those operators are not safety trained annually. There's no substance abuse checking. Quite frankly, I think you're taking a risk when you get into an Uber or Lyft. There's certainly a place for them. There's certainly a place for first mile, last mile, but we would advocate that there needs to be an even playing field instead of our ridership being siphoned away and our streets being clogged.
Any other thoughts?
You know, I would say that I definitely am not part of the echo chamber. If anything, we want to create an opportunity, I think, for the public to learn that this is a different type of expenditure program. And one of the things that we, as part of the Fix Our Roads Coalition, we were pushing for the passage of SB1 a year and a half ago. It was the actual stakeholders of the coalition who were telling the legislature, and as the condition of this bill, you have to include the lockbox. And that's why Prop 69 was included as a companion to SB1. It was because of the stakeholders like the Alliance and the League of Cities and the State Association of Counties and the building trades and everyone else who was these parts of that made up the significant members of the Fix Our Roads Coalition. It was what we were going to require in order to support the package, including the fact that SB1 codifies the repayment schedule of the last remaining outstanding dollars from previous transportation rates. And as we also touched on, is that by 2020, all of those dollars will be paid back, the taxpayers will be whole from previous rates. And then also, as was touched on, the $100 million annually in terms of Caltrans efficiencies, and also the creation of the Inspector General position. You know, these were things that the advocates for SB1 were demanding as part of the SB1 deal, and that is because we don't want to see the mistakes of the past repeated.
I don't know if this answers the question, but what dawns on me is that we must capture the hearts and minds of the average person on the street to explain the benefit here. And we have to do it in a very, very clear way and speak their language, because the average person doesn't understand the inside baseball that we talk about. And you know, we're doing a good job of talking to ourselves, and that's great because we need to do these things. And I enjoy coming to San Francisco. You know, it's great here. But how do we capture the hearts and minds of people? The auto industry did it very well. They have pretty people and beautiful people, and your hair, not mine, but the hair is blowing in the wind with the convertible, and they've made the automobile a sexy thing. We have to find a way to do that for public transportation.
I try not to disagree with people on stage, but I think the five of us are awful darn simple.
I see your hair blowing in the wind.
Yeah.
Beyond what's been said, I would just add two things. Regardless of how much money you have, there are a couple things that always are pertinent to address. One is increasing the efficiency and the effectiveness of using the money we have. One way in which I think we will need to address that in the future is having a greater degree of flexibility in project delivery and management techniques and approaches. And I think the legislature is going to come back to that issue, if not next year, in succeeding years. The other is always to strive for more fairness in how we raise and spend our money. Equity and fairness are always relevant topics, again, regardless of how much money you have. That's why we're doing a road user charge pilot to look at whether there's a more fair and equitable way of raising funding. So while it is absolutely foundational that we maintain SB1, it is not the end of the discussion. It is only the precursor to an ongoing set of conversations about how we optimize and how we maximize our resources to invest in the mobility of Californians for generations to come.
Great answers, thank you. Thank you to our speaker, Dr. Asha Weinstein, Director of the Mineta Transportation Institute, National Transportation Finance Center, to Roger Dickinson, Executive Director of Transportation California, Mike Hursh, General Manager of AC Transit, Michael Quigley, Executive Director of the California Alliance for Jobs, Phil Washington, CEO of LA Metro, and Carl Guardino, CEO of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Thank you for giving so generously of your time and expertise today. We are beyond grateful. And thanks also to our keynote speaker, Lori Berman, Director of the California Department of Transportation. And thanks to John Flaherty, Mineta Transportation Institute Board of Trustee, for his personal and just wonderful presence up on the stage moderating this morning's sessions. We also thank our audiences here on radio and the internet. I'm Dr. Karen Philbrick, Executive Director of the Mineta Transportation Institute, and this concludes today's program. Thank you.